Hello friends, Jeff here from House of Heresy, and back again with another deck tech video. For those that haven't seen this video series before, we're basically going through my different commander decks and breaking them down, talking about what's in them, why I built them the way that I did, and just looking for some feedback and comments, from hopefully, it seems like everyone has enjoyed them so far, so hopefully we continue with that. As always, I am not a professional, I am not an expert. These are just decks that I've worked on at different points in my commander playing career so far in the last few years. There's definitely room for improvement. I certainly am probably missing lots of cards, getting things wrong, what have you. I've been playing off and on in Magic since the mid-90s, since the Ice Age era. But I've had huge blocks of time where I have not been playing, so there's lots of cards that I just don't know even exist, even with the help of all the handy aids like Scryfall and EDH and stuff like that. It's still very easy to miss cards that could be quite good in my deck. So if you have any comments or thoughts about it, please throw them in there, because I definitely am always interested to hear what people have to say. But either way, I hope everyone enjoys the video, and today we're going to talk about Titania, Protector of Argoth. So this is a Lands Matters style deck with kind of a twist. So the way this deck plays is you care about lands, but you care just as much about your lands being destroyed as you do actually playing them. So Titania is 2 green and 3 generic for a 5/3, and when she enters the battlefield, you return target land card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So it's helpful when you play her to have something in the graveyard, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And then whenever a land you control is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, create a 5/3 elemental creature token. So, one of these guys? So ideally, what you want to do is you obviously want to play a lot of lands, but you also want to destroy a lot of lands, or have a lot of your lands enter the battlefield, and then create a bunch of elementals and swing in big. So there's different avenues to approach with this. So let's kind of get into the first stack here. So the first stack is, how do we get cards into graveyards and potentially get them out? So the easiest way to get a land into the graveyard is to have an ability to sacrifice it. And the easiest way to sacrifice a land is have a land that already is able to sacrifice. So these first few lands are going to be just that. You're able to sacrifice them yourself. Requires no other real ability to interact with something else. It doesn't need another card. It's not a combo. It's just this land is sacrificing itself. So first up, Lotus Veil is a great one. It is on the reserve list, so it's not a super expensive card, but I could understand why this might not make most people's lists, but I got a copy for the deck and it works pretty well. So when it ETBs, you have to sacrifice 2 untapped lands or bury it, and you can tap it to add 3 mana of any one color to your mana pool. So best case scenario, you play this card, you sacrifice 2 untapped lands, and you get 2 5/3 elemental tokens. Worst case is you don't sacrifice 2 lands, and you instead sacrifice the Lotus Veil and add 3 mana. And then if it does stick, then it's going to give you 3 mana each turn, which is quite nice. We have Lotus Field, which is very similar, except this one's hexproof and enters the battlefield tapped. When it ETBs, you sack 2 lands, and then when it's able to untap, you can add 3 mana of any one color. So these ones are a great way to get multiple elementals in a single turn. Then you got Blast Zone, which you add counters to it, and then you can sacrifice it to destroy each non-land permanent with mana value equal to the number of charge counters on Blast Zone. So if you're really just looking to get to get an elemental, you don't have to add a bunch of counters. You could just when it enters the battlefield, it comes with a single counter, so you could just immediately blow it up, pay 3 mana, tap this card, and sacrifice it, and maybe you'll blow up some one mana value cards, but you can at least get an elemental out of it. But it does have utility. It can wipe specific cards on the board, which is nice. And it's non-land permanent, so it's not just creatures. So you could target those Soul Rings or Arcane Signets or whatever, depending on how many charge counters you have, in addition to whatever creatures might fit that that profile. So it's a nice way to interact with different card types that you might not otherwise be able to as easily in this color. Then you got Buried Ruin, so you can sack it to return target artifact card from your graveyard to your hand. This 100% helped me win the game the last time I played this deck. I think it was actually last week. I was able to, was getting set up, had a great artifact, which I'll talk about in a little bit, on the battlefield. It got destroyed. I was able to go searching for this card, play this card, and then pull that artifact back into my hand, and then subsequently go after the rest of the table and win the game. So this is a really nice one. It also taps for colorless, which is helpful. Same with Blast Zone. So you got some utility. You can use it as a mana source until you don't need it anymore. Assuming you have an artifact card in your graveyard, you could really do this at any point. And even if you don't, I think you could still sacrifice it. You just wouldn't have it. Then you got the Hunter Maze. This is a new card from Phyrexia. All will be one. It enters tapped, and then you can pay 1 and a green to sack it, and sack the Hunter Maze, and draw a card. So this is a nice way to get a little card draw in addition to getting a 5/3. Urza's Saga will just eventually wind its way up into the graveyard through its as it runs through its life cycle there. So that part is nice as well. And this also will enable you to go get an artifact once you get to step 3 that would allow you to go find another land, which we'll get to in a little bit as well. So just an all-around good card. It's one of the top cards in Modern to come into the format in recent memory. Definitely it's one of the top cards in Modern Horizons 2 as a set. So great card in general, and the fact that when it hits the third step there, you sacrifice it is a great way to help the cause there and get those 5/3s out. Then you got some just general land destruction, which normally would be offensive, but in this case can work in your favor to blow up your own stuff to get some 5/3s. So you got Dust Bowl, Tectonic Edge, and so those are the 2 land destruction I put in there. There's other ones. You got like Strip Mine and stuff like that. So you could, if you're really wanting to blow your own stuff up that doesn't naturally sacrifice on its own, you definitely have plenty of options here. And it also allows you to be more offensive with it if you so desire. A lot of play groups really frown on land destruction, but they won't care if you're blowing up your own stuff. So it's it kind of depends on your group and all that. Then you got just all the different types of fetch lands. So they all sacrifice themselves to go find something else. So they are a great enabler for this deck. You're generating creatures, and you're also building up your mana base with other cards. So I'm just going to run through these real quick because most of these should be pretty familiar to people. But you got Fabled Passage, Myriad Landscape, Prismatic Vista, Wooded Foothills, Terramorphic Expanse, Blighted Woodland, Verdant Catacombs, Misty Rainforest, and Evolving Wild. So all these, you sacrifice them. You sacrifice these lands, and then you go find other lands. So it's a great way to continue the cycle there. And then you have some cards that just allow you to sacrifice lands for a variety of reasons. Crop Rotation is another great one. I believe I crop rotationed into the Buried Ruin, which then enabled me to pull the artifact out and subsequently win the game. So this one is an all-star in the deck. It only costs 1 green, and then you have to sack a land to search your library for a land card. It can be any land card. It doesn't have to be a basic. It can just be any land card. Put it onto the battlefield, and it doesn't have to come untapped, and then you shuffle your library. So in a lot of cases, the sacrificing a land can be kind of a steep cost, but this deck loves it. We want that. So this is a great card to have in here. Then you got like Roiling Regrowth. Same thing, sack a land, search your library for up to 2 land cards, basic land cards. Put them on the battlefield tapped and shuffle your library. Harrow is basically the exact same thing. You're sacrificing a land to go find 2 to put on there, so that's great value for us. We get an elemental and 2 lands out of it for 3 mana. Springbloom Druid, so when the Druid ETBs, you may sack a land, and if you do, search your library again for 2 basic lands, put them on the battlefield tapped and shuffle your library. So this is another way to generate a board state and put lands on there. Elvish Reclaimer. This one actually cares about the lands in the graveyard, so it's 1 mana for 1/2, and then it's got +2/+2 as long as there are 3 or more lands in your graveyard. And you can pay 2 to tap him and sack a land to search your library for a land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. So same thing with crop rotation. This will target any land, but the land that comes in will enter tapped. So that is the one downside to it, but still a great card. And then Zurin Orb. This is kind of one of our win cons. It's cost 0, so you can play it whenever, and then you can sacrifice a land and you gain 2 life. And the reason why this is a win con is you can sacrifice your entire land pool and generate that many 5/3s. And there's different ways in this deck that can be a payoff. This could happen at instant speed essentially because it's just an ability. So you could do this on the opponent to your right's end step, sacrifice all your lands, get a bunch of 5/3s, and then you can swing out with them big on your turn. But this is a great card, a really, really important card to this deck. If you're going to play this deck, you probably want to put this in here. It's only an uncommon. I don't think it's very expensive, but it's really, really important. It's a very important piece to have big turns and enable strong finishes there. It will end the game. Here's another new one, Conduit of Worlds. This is a strong card in its own right, but it works great in this deck. So the next few cards that we're going to talk about allow you to play lands from your graveyard. So who cares if you're sacrificing them? You just bring them right back and play them again. And a lot of these cards will, a lot of the lands, you can basically create a cycle where you're just sacking a land and then playing it again, and sacking a land and playing it again. And a lot of times you're getting payoffs when you're sacking those lands, as you saw, either through getting more mana out of it, like with the Lotus lands there, or just going and searching for other lands. So this is a great new card out of Phyrexia LB1. I think it's one of the more expensive rares in there. Still fairly cheap, I mean, relatively speaking. Since the set just released, some of these are probably cheaper than what they're going to be, so might be a good time to pick one up. But this is a great one. And then the other option too is if you don't plan on playing any other spells, you can also choose a non-land permanent in your graveyard. And if you haven't cast a spell, you can cast that card. So you still have to pay its mana cost, but you can cast it from the graveyard, and then you just can't cast any other spells. And it's only done at sorcery speed. So that's another great option. Like the top part is perfect for the deck to begin with, but the second part is really strong as well. Then you got Ancient Green Warden. It's one of our few ways to interact with flyers in this deck. It's got reach, and you can play lands from your graveyard. And if a land entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. And we'll get into some cards that care about that. Like we do have a group of landfall cards in this deck because we intend to play and sacrifice and play again a lot of lands. Titania, Nature's Force. This is a card that came out of, it's coded as the Brothers War Commander, but I think this was actually out of their set box. The set, I forget what the product type is, but it's coded as a Commander card, but it was not in one of the Commander precons. But it's still a very strong card. So for two green and 4 generic, you get a 6/6, another version of Titania. You may play forests from your graveyard. So this is specific to forests, but we have a lot of forests in this deck, so that's okay. And whenever a forest ETBs, you create a 5/3 elemental creature token. So we get them when they leave the battlefield, we get them when we enter the battlefield, if we have both Titanias on the battlefield. And then whenever an elemental you control dies, you may mill 3 cards. So that, I haven't really had to get to that point because I haven't really been able to play this card that much since I've put it into the deck. However, that could be pretty strong because we like, as you're seeing, we like cards in the graveyard because we have ways to recur them, especially land cards. So it could be a nice way to keep the cycle afloat there. Ramanap Excavator is one of those classic ones that you can play lands from your graveyard. Very strong for this deck. And then we got just some general recursion. Regrowth, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. So it could be a land, could be anything else. It's just helpful. Same thing with Eternal Witness. It does the same exact thing except it's a creature. And then you get Timeless Witness, so a little bit more expensive, but you can also eternalize it. So just some nice, it's good to have recursion that isn't just for lands, because we do have cards that we generally, oh, sorry, didn't mean to hit the camera there. We do have cards that we generally want to have on the battlefield. And it's really unfortunate if they enter the graveyard and we can't pull them out. So then we have some ways to go find lands, besides just sacrificing them and playing them in the graveyard. So probably the biggest one of them all is Reshape the Earth. This is definitely a later game card, but as you'll see, we do have ways to ramp, so it could get played earlier. This is one of the 9 mana cycle from Commander Legends. You search your library for up to 10 land cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. So this is a nice way to dump a bunch of cards, and it's any land. So it's unfortunate that they come into play tapped. However, it's a lot of people, most people don't have an easy way to interact with a bunch of lands. So if this is your turn, essentially, you could dump all your fetch lands or whatever. So you could definitely set yourself up to have a strong subsequent set of turns by bringing lands in that can generate elementals for you. So just a really good card for the deck. Rampant Growth, same thing, search your library for a basic land, put it on tapped, and then shuffle your library, so you're looking for those lands there. 3 Visits is searching for a forest. This one you just put on the battlefield, it doesn't have to be tapped, or it isn't tapped, and then shuffle your library. Wood Elves, similar, except it's a creature. You're searching your library for a forest card, putting it on the battlefield, and then shuffling. Far Wanderings, you're searching for a basic land, putting it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffling. But there's a threshold, so if this is played later in the game where you have a bunch of cards in your graveyard, if you have 7 or more cards there, then you can instead search your library for up to 3 basic lands, putting them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffling your library. Cultivate, you're looking for 2 basic lands, and then putting 1 on the battlefield, 1 in your hand. Same thing with Kodama's Reach. Sylvan Scrying, so this is you're just searching for a land card in general, putting it into your hand. So this isn't going on the battlefield, but it's a great way to tutor for whatever impactful land you need. As you've seen, we have a lot of lands that are utility lands in addition to being sacrifice outlets, essentially, or being able to sacrifice. Then you got Expedition Map, which is a great. This is one you can search for with Urza Saga, and will then let you go find a land card. So you pay 2 to sacrifice Expedition Map to go find a land card, reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. So this is another way you could go get like Buried Ruin or something like that, or one of the other cards. And then we got ways that are we're kind of playing with. It's kind of card draw, kind of not, but it lets you hone in on lands. So Abundant Harvest, you can choose land or non-land. And then you reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a card of the chosen kind, putting that into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So you would basically just get the first land card that was on top of the library there, put into your hand. So, or you could choose non-land and go for something else. Once Upon a Time, this is nice. You can play this for free if it's the first play you've cast this game. But you look at the top 5 cards of your library, you can reveal a creature or land card from among them, put it into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your library. So again, you can kind of pick and choose what suits you best at that point in time. I will say we have a lot more lands than we do creatures in this deck, so it's generally a safer choice to pick land. But if you're really looking to get some creatures out, then that's a good way to do it. And then we have cards that let us play more than 1 land in a turn. So Azusa, Lost But Seeking is a classic. So you can play 2 additional lands on each of your turns for a total of 3, which is great. You got Corsair of Krupfix. So you can play with the top card of your library revealed, and you may play the top card of your library if it's a land card. And whenever a land ETBs, you gain a life. Or whenever a land under your control ETBs, you gain a life. So this is another way to kind of keep the lands flowing. Augur of Autumn, you can look at the top card of your library at any time and play land, and then you may play lands from the top of your library. So if you look and see that there's a land on there, you could play that as your land for turn. And then if you were to have 3 or more creatures with different powers, you can cast creature spells from the top of your library. So that may happen. I think we have a pretty good mix of creature powers in this deck. So if you do get 3 or more creatures out, there's a decent chance that you will probably meet that criteria to where you could play a creature on top there as well. Then you got Explore. It's a sorcery. You can play an additional land this turn and draw a card, which is great. We love card draw. We love playing extra lands. Druid class. This is another great one. This is one of the ones that you pay to level up. This came out of AFR. So at the first level, when you pay the green and 1 generic, whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. You can level it up to level 2, and then you can play an additional land on each of your turns. And then level 3, target land you control becomes a creature with haste, and this creature's power and toughness are equal to the number of lands you control. It's still a land. So that's a nice way, especially towards the end of the game, to kind of help finish somebody off potentially. I usually will prioritize getting to level 2 pretty quickly so I can be churning out the lands. But even just level 1 is great because we play a ton of lands, and especially if we're cycling through them between like playing lands out of our graveyard and then sacrificing them and then playing them again. So you can almost always guarantee land drops each turn as you get further into the game with this, and that can definitely be beneficial to generate some life. Court of Bounty. This is part of the court cycle from Commander Legends. You become the monarch when it enters the battlefield, and then at the beginning of your upkeep, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield, which is great. That's a second land that we get to play in a turn. If you're the monarch, instead you may put a creature or land card from your hand onto the battlefield, which is even better because we do have some expensive creatures in here. So it's just a pretty good solid card. We usually have enough mana to where playing this isn't going to be super detrimental to to our turn. And then finally, this is another newer card, Out of Brothers War, one of the top cards. This might actually be the most expensive card in the set right now. But for 2 green and X, you create X/1/1 Forest Dryad land tokens. So those are very similar to the Dryad Arbor. In fact, that's basically what they are, except they're just a token copy of it. But it's a 1/1 that also taps for green and is a land. So as you'll see, we have different ways to interact with lands in the deck that we'll get into, in addition to what we've already seen. And it's just another sacrifice choice if we want to bring other, like Lotus Veils or something like that in there. So it's that really could blow up the board in a positive way for you, like really make it an insurmountable board state for your opponents, basically. And some of the ways to do that is to have cards that care about lands entering the battlefield, primarily through the ability Landfall. So, of course, almost everybody's familiar with the Scoot Swarm. It is loved and hated by those who play it and those who play against it. But for a green and 2 generic, you get a 1/1, little creature insect. But it's got landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you create a 1/1 green insect creature token. If you control 6 or more lands, which we will probably get to pretty quickly in this deck, you create a token that's a copy of Scoot Swarm instead. So that means, assuming that you play Scoot Swarm and you have 6 lands, the next land you play will generate a Scoot Swarm. Then the next land you play after that will generate 2 Scoot Swarms for a total of 4. And then so you just keep generating more and more Scoot Swarms for each one that's already on the battlefield. It will create another one. So it gets really big really fast. It's a great way, it was a great way in the past to crash Arena. I definitely saw it. Had it happen to me a few times where my opponent was playing Scoot Swarm and then just went crazy and crashed the game. So it was wonderful. So that's a great one. Rampaging Baloths is another pretty decent one. It's a 6/6 with trample, and whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may create a 4/4 green beast creature token. So we like putting bodies on the board with our lands, and this is another great way to do it. Lotus Cobra, it's another classic. For 1 and a green, you get a 2/1 that's got landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, you add 1 mana of any color. So basically just a little bit of ramp there, which is nice. Avenger of Zendikar, another classic. So for 2 green and 5 generic, you get a 5/5. And when it ETBs, you create a 0/1 green plant creature token for each land you control. So this is definitely gets better the further into the game you go. And it's also got landfall, so whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you may put a 1/1 counter on each plant creature you control. So all those little 0/1s get bigger and bigger each time you play a land after Avenger of Zendikar enters the battlefield. Then you got Kalini Heart Expedition, which it's an enchantment that's got landfall. So you put quest counters on that when you're playing lands, and then you can remove 3 quest counters and sacrifice it to search your library for 2 basic land cards, putting them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffling your library. It's kind of clunky compared to some of the other stuff we have in here, but it's still pretty good for the deck. We want to play lands, we want to find lands, so it just helps enable that. Then you got Zendikar's Royal, another landfall enchantment. So whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you can create a 2/2 green elemental creature token. So again, lands creating creatures, that's what we like. That's what we want with this deck. Kamal's Will. This is part of the Will cycle from Commander Legends. So you can choose one, or if you have Titania out, you can choose both. Or you can choose one or both. So until end of turn, any number of target lands you control become 1/1 elemental creatures with vigilance, indestructible, and haste, and they're still lands. That's great for us. We'll probably have lots of lands. So that means we can swing out with a bunch. Or you can choose target creature you don't control, and each creature you control deals damage equal to its power to that creature. So if you are doing both, you probably have a good chance of assassinating whatever creature your opponent controls that you want gone. Multani, Yavamaya's Avatar. This one, you get +1/+1 for each land you control and each land in your graveyard. So she doesn't care. As long as it's out of your deck or out of your library, then she's going to benefit from that. And then you can pay 1 in a green and return 2 lands you control to your owner's hand to return her from the graveyard to your hand. So you can keep kind of cycling her. And she's another one with reach, which is helpful, and she's got trample. So she can be a pretty strong finisher in the deck. And then finally we got Nissa, Who Shakes the World. Planeswalker for 2 green and 3 generic. She comes in with 5 loyalty, and she just has a static ability. Whenever you tap a forest for mana, add an additional green. That alone's really good. We got lots of forests. We have ways to make all of our lands forests, so that's a pretty strong ability. Then you can increase your loyalty by 1 to put 3 1/1 counters on up to 1 target non-creature land you control, and untap it, and it becomes a 0/0 elemental creature with vigilance and haste that is still a land. So you are, again, turning your lands into creatures. And if it dies, who cares? That's another 5/3 that's coming, or that's getting put in its place, and you probably have a decent chance of getting it back from the graveyard anyways. And then if you can get her up to 8 loyalty or higher, you can -8 her to get an emblem. Lands you control have indestructible. And you can search your library for any number of forest cards, put them onto the battlefield, and then shuffle your library. So this is another kind of finisher if it gets that far. Very strong card, great one for this deck. All right, then we got cards. So the top row is mostly land focused. Then we got cards that are just more generically good for the deck and do different things. So first step is going to be card draw. Sylvan Library goes without saying that this is a great card for any deck that can take green. Basically lets you draw 3 cards instead of 1, and then you can choose if you want to keep up to all 3 of those, or by paying life, or just put them back on the top of your library. So it kind of helps you cycle through each turn. But it's a really good card for 2 mana, and it just got reprinted in Dominaria Remastered, so it's probably cheaper than it's been in a while. It also got reprinted in the Commander Collection Green, which is where this one's from. So there's definitely ways to get this card where it's not prohibitively expensive at the moment. You got Return of the Wild Speaker. It's an instant, and you choose one for a green and 4 generic. You can draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control, or non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn. So this is another one of those finisher cards. We have just turned all of our lands into creatures, or we played Awaken the Woods, and suddenly all those 1/1 forests or forest dryad land creature tokens become 4/4s, which is really strong. You got Harmonize, which is just drawing cards. We like card draw. Worldly Tutor, go search your library for a creature card. We got plenty of creature cards that enable this deck, so it's another really strong card. Also got a reprint both in Commander Collection Green and in the Dominaria Remastered, so a very strong card. Finale of Devastation, you pay 2 green and X. You can search your library and or graveyard for a creature card with converted mana cost X or less, put it on the battlefield, and then shuffle. And if X is 10 or more, creatures you control get +X and gain haste until end of turn. So this is another great finisher. Who cares if you go find a creature that's 10 or more? If you can pay the 10, or I guess the 12 mana in this case, then all your creatures get +10/+10. So if you have a bunch of the Forest Dryad creature tokens or a bunch of lands that became creatures, you know, what have you, even your elemental creature tokens are becoming 15/13. So it's just a great way to end the game. Fierce Empath, it's an elf that lets you search, when it enters the battlefield, you can search your library for a creature card with CMC 6 or greater, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. So we like those types of tutors. There's plenty of, so there's enough creatures that cost that much in this deck to make it worthwhile. Shared Summons, you can search your library for up to 2 creature cards with different names, reveal them, put them into your hand, and then shuffle your library. Again, we like tutors. This is a nice way to pull creature cards that will be beneficial to you at that point in the game into your hand. Seedborn Muse, just a really, really strong card. It got reprinted in Commander Collection Green, and it lets you untap all permanents you control during each other player's untap step. So you have ways to generate stupid amounts of mana each player turn if you so desire. And then this is the artifact card that I was talking about. If you can get this out, then all those lands, all those Dryad tokens, whatever, become really, really strong. And this combined with Zuran Orb will pretty much potentially win you the game out of nowhere. Because Zuran Orb doesn't cost anything, so you just have to be able to pay for a Chroma's Memorial, or maybe Zuran Orb's already in the battlefield, or this one's on the battlefield, what have you. But the combination of the two, you get a Chroma's Memorial down, you sacrifice all your lands to Zuran Orb with Titania out, obviously, and then you turn all those lands into 5/3s. They get flying, first strike, vigilance, trample, haste, protection from black, and protection from red, and they're probably going to swing to victory in most cases. Very strong card. This is pretty much an instant kill for most of my group, and we just and yeah, it goes from there. Apex Devastator. This is just a fun card. I wanted to put it in there. I wanted to play with it, and this is my only real green deck at this point, where it makes sort of sense. So for 10 mana, 2 green, 8 generic, you get a 10/10 with Cascade, 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 Cascade. Each one of those is resolved independently, so you are cascading for 9 or lower mana value each time. We got all sorts of different variety of mana values in this deck. It may be great, may be terrible, but it's a fun card. It's out of Commander Legends, and it's definitely been ticking up in value the further and further away we get from the launch of that set. So this is one you could easily drop because it really doesn't truly fit with the deck, but it's just cool to play a 10/10 and have 4 cascades go off there. I think it's fun. Then we have some interactive spells, primarily destruction. So Force of Vigor. This is part of the Force cycle. So you can either, like Force of Negation and some of the other ones. So you can either pay the 2 green, 2 generic, or if it's not your turn, you can instead exile a green card from your hand rather than paying its cost, and destroy up to 2 target artifacts and or enchantments. So it's pretty strong. There's lots of really nasty artifacts out there, like Chroma's Memorial and all sorts of other ones. So it's a pretty good card. Beast Within, you're just destroying target permanent, and its controller creates a 3/3 beast creature token. Again, real strong single target removal. Corrosive Grip lets you destroy target artifact or enchantment with a split second, so it can't be interacted with, just happens. And then Bane of Progress. So when Bane of Progress enters the battlefield, destroy all artifacts and enchantments, and then put a 1/1 counter on Bane of Progress for each permanent destroyed this way. You can definitely shield yourself from this by not playing your artifacts or enchantments, but you will probably take a bit of a hit. But for some decks, this is just utter devastation. Like if you're playing any sort of artifact themed deck or a deck with a lot of treasure token generation or something like that, you can really force people's hands. Is it essential to this deck? No, but it's very strong. Just got a reprint in Commander Collection Green as well. I say just, I guess it's been 2 years now, but it was in that Commander Collection set. And yeah, it's a really pretty strong card for green. No reason not to put it in there if you have it, but you could definitely swap that out for other cards that help enable the theme of the deck. Then we got some mana generation of different types here. So Elvish Mystic, just a little mana dork that taps for green. Got Omnath, Locus of Mana. So this combined with Seedborn Muse is awesome because you can make him huge. And then you get to keep that mana each turn going forward. So it gets 1/1 for each, +1/+1 for each unspent green mana you have. And if Seedborn Muse is untapping all your permanents, then you are just generating. Actually, I'm questioning myself. Pretty sure, yeah, all permanents. Okay, just want to make sure it wasn't non-land permanents, but yes. So Seedborn Muse combined with Omnath, Locus of Mana is really good. And we will probably have lots of lands. So even if you don't have Seedborn Muse out, you could still pump them up pretty good. And keep that green mana, which is great. Great Henge, just a really stupidly good mana rock out of Throne of Eldraine. A mana rock with so much more. So it costs a lot, but it costs X less to cast, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Really good chance in this deck you'll have at least a 5-power creature out. Between Titania and her ability to generate 5/3s, it's pretty good odds. So worst case, probably only costing 4, but we do have higher powered creatures, so it could be even less than that. You tap it for 2 green, and you gain 2 life, and then whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, you put a 1/1 counter on it and draw a card. Really, really strong card. Very expensive card. I think it's the most expensive card out of Throne of Eldraine. So if you have it or have the ability to put it in, it's really good. I wouldn't say it's essential to this deck by any stretch, because we're not really that focused on casting creatures. But if you have it, I would say throw it in there. And since this is really my only green deck, it was an easy decision to put it in here. And finally, Soul Ring, because why wouldn't you put it in there? And this is the Commander Collection green Soul Ring, so it seemed fitting to put it in there. All right, final pile. We have lands that aren't getting sacrificed, that aren't sacrificing themselves or destroying other lands. Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth is just great in any green deck, or any deck that has green. Each land is a forest in addition to its other land types. So this is everybody, not just you. So it is kind of a group hug kind of card. Most people are happy to see this or Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth come out, especially if they're playing in those colors, because it really fixes their mana in great ways. But this also enables you to be strategic about when you sacrifice those cards. Like if Titania is not out and you're playing a bunch of the fetch lands, if you have Yavimaya out as well, then they can tap for green and you don't have to sack them right away. You can wait till you get Titania out there to take full advantage of them. But yeah, it's just a really good card. You got this came out of Modern Horizons 2, so obviously as that set gets further from release, this will probably continue to get more expensive, but it's not a ridiculously costly card at this point. And would definitely recommend it. And they got different variants. They got the regular version, they got this one, the extended art, and then they also have the retro frame for that, so it's a pretty good one. And of course Dryad Arbor, because why not? This deck likes lands, this deck likes creatures, this one's both. This one you can use as a blocker to have it enter your battlefield, which allows Titania to generate a 5/3 for you. So I would say a 5/3 or a 1/1 getting traded for a 5/3 is a pretty good trade. And it also taps for land. It does have Summoning Sickness, or taps for a green. So it's not like a true land drop, but it would count as your land drop. So you just wouldn't be able to take advantage of it right away. Castle Garenbrig is a pretty good one for green cards. It comes into play tapped unless you control a forest, which you probably will, and it taps for green. Or you can pay 2 generic and 2 green to add 6 green and spend this mana only to cast creatures or activate abilities of creatures. As you've seen, we do have some pretty pricey creatures, so this definitely could come into play. Worst case, you're just using it for a green mana at no real cost. It's not, you'll almost always have a forest out, so the likelihood of this coming into play tapped is pretty low in this deck. But I guess it is possible, but in most cases this is just a strong card to have. Vesuva, this one is probably not super necessary, but it gives you some flexibility because it lets you copy a land in play, and then it comes into play tapped. So, or it comes into play tapped as a copy of the chosen land. So if you really want to start pumping out a bunch of elemental tokens, then you could copy a card that is able to be sacked. Or, I mean, you could even copy, like, say, Lotus Veil or something like that, and then just not pay the additional cost, so then it goes into the graveyard or what have you. There's just a lot of utility with it, so it's again, not a necessary card, but it gives you a lot of options. So it's pretty good in this deck, I think. Worst case, you're copying a forest, and then you just have a very expensive, monetarily a very expensive forest. But there's a lot of upside to it, so I think it's pretty good. Command Beacon, because Titania is 5 mana to start, so it's always nice to not have to pay that, or pay 2 more than that each time you have to recast her, so it's just pretty decent. Mossword Bridge, this is another one, probably not super essential, but you have, all you need is 2 elementals, or a Titania and an elemental to go off to get your hideaway cost there. So the way it works is when it enters the battlefield, you look at the top 4 cards, exile one of them face down, and put the rest on the bottom of your library. And then otherwise it just taps for a green. But you can pay a green and tap it and play the exiled card without paying its mana cost if you have 10 or more total power among creatures you control. So again, it's pretty easy to meet that threshold with this deck. So I would say it's probably not a bad, it's not a super critical addition, but it's a nice way to cheat in something expensive fairly early in the game. And then we just have a bunch of forests. This deck by far has more lands in it than any other deck I play. As you've seen with especially a lot of my monocolor decks, I actually lean more towards the low side with like Gix and Svelun. I think I played with like 28 lands total. So this one's got way more between this stack and then the ones that are in the sacrifice stack. So yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed this. This one is a pretty fun deck. It plays differently than a lot of green decks because it cares about lands, but not in the way that a lot of green decks do. And granted, we do have a lot of the normal high payoff land cards like Scoot Swarm and Avenger of Zendikar and stuff like that. But that's not like the main. That's not the win con. That's just a nice to have in the deck. The win con is get a bunch of 5/3s and beat people's faces in while playing and sacrificing lands. So yeah, it's good fun. It's good, clean Magic fun. Green fun there. So yeah, as always, I hope you all enjoyed this. If you did, please give us a like. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe. We do put out new content every week, generally about 3 times a week. We do two box break / pack cracking episodes, generally on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and then we've been doing the deck tech, which you're watching right now, on Saturdays. So if you'd like to keep seeing that, then please subscribe, and then definitely throw some comments down there. I really enjoyed all the interaction I've had with everybody for all the other decks that I've showcased so far. There's been some really, I tend to play some interesting ones, as I'm sure you've seen if you've watched any of the other ones, and I would classify this one as an interesting one as well. So it's cool to hear like what other people are doing with those similar decks, because I know that people play these. It's not like I'm picking the most obscure commanders to build decks around. So I know the general population plays them too. So yeah, until next time, hope everyone enjoyed this and have a great day.